Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this live webinar on Selenium WebDriver integration with Ranorex. Real quick to introduce ourselves here, there'll be two presenters, myself, Jason Branham, and also my colleague who's in Austria right now, Christian Breitweiser.
Hello everybody, I'm Chris. Jay, thank you very much for the introduction. Maybe you guys remember us too. We were the ones that also did the sneak peek webinar, and this time we would like to give you a little bit deeper introduction into Selenium, talk a little bit of other topics. But Jay, move on for the moment. You will hear a little bit more from me in a few minutes or a few moments.
Yes, thanks Chris. As you can see there at the bottom, of course, we always want to take questions from you guys. So if you look onto your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a little box for questions. Typically, it's in the upper right corner of your screen. You may need to expand it if it's minimized right now. But certainly make sure to submit any questions through that panel. Chris will try to answer those while I'm presenting, and I'll do the same while he's presenting. So we'll try to answer any questions we can immediately, especially if they support kind of where we're at in our talking points. Of course, we will also have a Q&A section at the end to take care of any questions that are left over. So definitely feel free to utilize that. Let's quickly talk about our agenda. We're basically going to give you a overview of our Selenium features. We're going to show you how to add an endpoint and even how to target certain capabilities using our Selenium plugin. And we'll then I'll have a couple slides to overlay or show you a couple of use cases and best practices. And finally, we'll have a section for questions and answers. So let's go ahead and talk about Selenium. I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Yeah, so in this webinar, I would also give a little bit some introduction in Selenium, talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of Selenium and how we can deal with the beast a little bit better way. So Jay, could you move to the next slide? And this time out, in the last webinar, I mentioned that I'm not the biggest fan of PowerPoint, but I don't know if you would like me standing in front of a flip chart and then writing something on it, because usually after a day I can't even read my own handwriting. So PowerPoint might be the better idea. Okay. Let's have a look at Selenium here. Just first very important topic is the distinction of Selenium. There is Selenium 1, which is also called Selenium RC, and that stuff is legacy. And we're not supporting that, and I even don't know if it's still supported by the Selenium community. We have done the integration for the Selenium WebDriver. This is Selenium 2, and this is also already in the stage of becoming a W3C standard. Currently, it's a candidate recommendation. This is the step before the standard. And Selenium has some really big advantages. First of all, that stuff is open source. Just tell you a little bit about me as a person. I am really an open source guy. I'm running Linux pretty much on every system at home, on my computer, on my TV, on my NAS, on pretty much every system on the media players, and just using Windows for playing computer games. And yeah, so we're trying to embrace here this open source tool. And yeah, Selenium, the difference of Selenium to a Selenium WebDriver to the Selenium RC is that they implemented in specific browser drivers or browser-specific drivers like the Chrome driver, the Safari driver, IE driver, and so on. And these drivers are automating then the browser. And Ranorex, or actually the script, is sending commands to this driver. And the whole architecture is built up as a client-server system, what also provides the possibility to create a grid or a cloud structure because of the client-server architecture. You have a server, multiple clients can talk to the server. And then when we have a look at Selenium, in the right picture, we see some kind of a script. And they're usually this custom code, this script drives the automation. So the client sends commands to the server that forwards it to to the driver, and this tool executes or then automates the browser. Just a very rough explanation. And in Selenium, you have the possibility to use different kinds of identifiers, CSS selectors, the ID of an object or an XPath, and Ranorex already provides, for example, the recognition via an ID or via an XPath. CSS selectors can currently only be used in Selenium. And as I already mentioned, it's a candidate recommendation. And now when we talk about the pros and the cons of Selenium, as you see in the picture on the right-hand side, when you're working with the IDs or the selectors, you need to use the inspect tools, the dev tools in the browser, then copy the locators, put them in your code. Actually, that works. I'm a developer myself. I can work with that stuff, but it can become cumbersome. Let's put it like that. And with Ranorex, we can add some additional value to Selenium. Jay, could you move to the next slide, please? Jay, thank you. Maybe the delay from US to Europe is a little bit bigger. Okay, and I already mentioned the cloud and the grid structure, what is possible with Selenium. Here we see a very brief overview how such a grid can look like. You have a hub, this is the server, and there are different nodes are connected to this server, to the hub, and you can run the automation on these nodes. The node can be Windows IE, or can contain Windows Internet Explorers, can contain Firefox on Ubuntu or Safari, or even a mobile browser, could be an Android or an iOS device. That stuff would run in Appium, and that brings a big advantage. We can run the tests in parallel. We can execute one and the same tests in parallel on all the browsers available in the grid. And we can also call or run tests on different browsers, different browser versions, different operating systems. It also becomes pretty easy to distribute the tests because you just have to add additional nodes to your Selenium grid. And the grid will take care of the parallelization, of forwarding or of connecting the client to the respective node. And we also see here the so-called grid console in the bigger picture on the right-hand side, where you see the browsers that are available in the grid. We'll see that a little bit later in my part, also in Jay's part, where we'll see such a grid and where we'll scale and execute tests on the grid. Okay, Jay, next slide, please. Wonderful, thank you. Now let's have a closer look at the pros and the cons of Selenium. Like I said, I'm an open source guy. I really love open source, and I also wrote here, open source is free. Partially, what I usually say. You don't want to know how much time I invested to get my XBMC on my QBox running, how much time I invested in Debian. I love to play with it, but usually this open source also consumes time. And it's easier if you use a commercial tool, or usually it goes faster. You get the support from Ranorex, you get it from us. This is, yeah, open source. Actually, you don't have to pay money for the software, but you will pay the money in time. I paid it on my Debian systems, on my Arch systems, but sometimes we don't have the time when we're in a company. We don't have the time to play with a tool for hours just to get it working, because yeah, the company maybe won't pay us for that. Then when we have a look at another pro of Selenium, actually the execution is very, very fast. If you see a Selenium test running, that's really, yeah, not lightning speed, but fast. And it will become the future standard. You can easily run cross-browser tests. You can implement your tests in different languages with language bindings in Java, C#, JavaScript, I think Python, maybe Ruby, if I have it correctly in mind, and so on. And it also provides you really big flexibility, because you can execute, you can customize the whole framework. You're on a code level. That can help you a lot. Sorry, my phone rang. But there are also some cons on Selenium. First of all, you need higher technical programming skills, and sometimes not everybody in the team has these skills, especially if you have people who usually did manual test automation. They are not developers. They might have some scripting skills, but usually some decent programming is needed to set up a stable Selenium test framework. At the end, even you would have to test this framework at all. Then also creating stable selectors can be tricky. I remember the last Selenium Conf in London, that was I think November last year, where there were a couple of talks where the people were talking about the selectors, how to get the selector stable, how to get rid of flaky tests and that stuff. Yeah, and then also sometimes it's the interaction between testers and developers. It doesn't exist out of the box when someone is using Selenium. You are on a scripting or on a coding level, and if a tester doesn't understand code, that can look like a completely different language. Hey, what's standing in there? No clue what's happening in there. Yeah, especially if the programmer is a highly skilled one and uses everything what the language offers. Then for a tester, understanding the code can become pretty hard. Yeah, and the last one, to be honest, this is my favorite one. We have quite good relationships also with Selenium consultants, and one pretty good consultant once said, I know nobody who ever got page objects right the first time. Page objects is a famous pattern how to create your UI mapping, how you build up this mapping in Selenium, that you implement functions for an individual page with the objects behind it, roughly speaking, and usually many things can go wrong and actually also go wrong in this UI mapping, in this object mapping. And now when we move to the next slide, I would like to then present the cons of Selenium a little bit closer with the pros of Ranorex, where we would like to bridge the gap, where we would like to add value to your Selenium tests, make your Selenium tests possible more stable, increase the stability with the object mapping and so on. So when we go through the right-hand side, we have Ranorex has a lower entry barrier, especially with our action modules, where also testers can use these action modules, but the developers can still stay on their coding level. We even implemented a feature which you guys were asking in the last webinar. You can now even access the driver directly in Ranorex. That's working now. So the cons of Selenium: higher technical skills, programming needed. If you have this, if you would like to do that, that's not a con anymore. That's nothing negative, and you can combine it with the pros of Ranorex. Then you can also work together on one solution. If you rely on the Ranorex repository and the actions table, then you can use the whole UI mapping in the background. As a developer, you can use it, but also as a tester. That's also something pretty nice. And when we talk about the selectors, the Ranorex SPY and our XPath, everybody of you who used the SPY, I think you like it. I personally really love the tool. That's without the SPY, to be honest, I wouldn't love Ranorex as much as I love it. And that can make the con on the left-hand side. The selectors can be tricky, maybe a little bit easier to get the UI mapping and also the object mapping right, because we have the Ranorex repository, and the testers could use the repository as it is, work in a keyword-driven way, and the developers could write page objects around the repository and work in their former way of working. So we can really put the cons and the pros of Selenium together, and we can, in my opinion, really add value to Selenium, and the people can still work the way they used to work. Okay, hopefully I didn't add too much confusion here. Jay, still there?
I'm here.
There he is.
let's get right
Let's
on
go
to
to the
it.
demo.
Yeah, let's get into the tool.
That's your part. Mm-hmm.
All
Okay,
right.
fingers crossed that everything is working.
Yes, yes, thank you.
So now I will take over on the Q&A panel. So the answers will now come from my end.
Thank you, Chris. All right, so what we're going to show today, I basically am using just one of our kind of wrapped up sample projects here. So if you're familiar with Ranorex, you know the start page here, you'll have these little sample projects down below. We're just going to take a look at the web example and show you how we can execute this using the Selenium WebDriver feature. So we go ahead and close the start page here and take a look at our test suite. So here I just have, as mentioned, basically the same exact test that you'll find in that sample project, where we're going to use WordPress on the web. So you can kind of get an idea of the execution here. We open our browser, we log in, do some validations, log out, and clean everything up at the end as well. So nothing too fancy going on here, and I want to push forward the point that really with this Selenium feature, nothing's changing on the Ranorex side. You still use Ranorex the way you have been. Really the only thing that changes is how you're executing your test. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how to set up what we call an endpoint so that we can execute through WebDriver. It really consists of two steps. The first step is you will need to go to Selenium's web page, where you can find this standalone server download. So it looks like the current version is 3.4. So that is going to be required to be installed on your execution machine, whether it's a VM or a cloud machine, no matter what kind of machine you're using. You'll need to have that server up and running. So let's go ahead and do that step one. I'm actually remoted in here to a Windows 10 machine called RX Presales 002. And all I'm going to need to do is start my Selenium server there. So I'm going to go ahead and open a command window here. And it is a jar file, so I need to type in the proper commands to start it. There we go. So I'll hit enter, and that should start up our server. We get the feedback that the Selenium server is up and running. So that's step one. You get your server running on your execution machine. Step two, and the final step, we actually do here in Ranorex Studio. We need to add this machine as an endpoint. So you'll notice that this little panel here to the right should appear if you're using the newest version of Ranorex. You'll hit that add endpoint button. If you don't see that panel for whatever reason, we also have the toolbar up here where you can open it up, the view endpoints button. Let's go ahead and add our first endpoint. We'll be adding this Windows 10 VM. So what we'll need to do is select the endpoint type. We're going to be targeting a WebDriver endpoint. We have to give it a name. I don't know, let's call it Win10 VM. And then we need to give a address. That's the address that the server running on that machine creates. We get a little example text down here to show you how that will typically look. Of course, I need to give my computer name, RX Presales 002. The default port for a Selenium server is 4444. And then we just give the final part of our address here. Let's go ahead and test that connection. All right, good. We can see that we're able to communicate with that Selenium server. And I'll go ahead and add this endpoint. And we'll hit complete. And what you'll see now in this endpoint view is that we can either select to execute locally, the way Ranorex always does, or we can select this new endpoint we just created, this WebDriver endpoint, to execute our test. So rather than run this back locally on my machine here, let's go ahead and select the Windows 10 endpoint, and then I'll run this test, this first test case here, and we'll watch it be executing on that remote machine. Let me go ahead and pull it up here. So this command window is actually on my local machine, giving you some feedback about what's happening. But you'll notice that on the Windows 10 VM, we've opened up a new browser and are executing our test. I did see a little bit of feedback. I guess one user was having a little trouble hearing the sound, so certainly if something goes wrong with the audio latency, reach out to me via the questions panel. I'll make sure to repeat anything that may have been missed if that's the case. I see the question asking about, do the WebDriver computers show up automatically like you would on a mobile device or agent? As long as they're running a Selenium server, you'll be able to reach out to them, but they will not show up automatically as they do in the agent feature that we have. Good question. So you will need to type in that address, at least for the initial adding. Of course, once you've added it, then this connected status will show you whether the server is running or not. And we're almost finished with our test here. Looks like we're in the cleanup stage. We've done some validation. And I guess we'll log out here. Quite a long test, but as you see, everything is running headlessly now. So we're going through WebDriver, meaning I can do whatever I want on my machine here, check my emails, even work on maybe another test. So a nice feature is that this all runs headlessly. And there we have our completed execution. Of course, we get our Ranorex report back, as we're so used to seeing. You could break down each one of these modules and look at each action. All that's standard Ranorex, but now running through Selenium. So let's show you that, again, nothing changes with Ranorex. So if we want to data drive this test, and maybe we want to run it first in, let's take a look at the open browser module here. Looks like we were targeting Chrome initially, but if we want to data drive this and run this sequentially, let's say in Chrome and then Edge, we can use the same exact process as we have always used, the data-driven approach, which consists of 3 steps really. The first step is setting up a variable. Let's go ahead and create a variable here. We'll call it browser. That's step 1. Step 2 and 3 are done at the test suite view. Let's back out to that test suite view. We'll see that we need to populate this variable browser with whatever information we need, in this case the browser names. So step 2 is to set up a data source. Right click on the test case and select data source. Let's just go ahead and create a simple data table here in our project. We'll just call it browsers. And we got to build up this table ourselves. Let's give a column header here called browser, and then I'm just going to supply the names of whatever browsers I want to target. Let's go with Edge and Chrome. Step 3 is right next door here at data binding. We need to connect that data source, that column, to our variable. And we see it there, the open browser variable. Let's hit check. Of course, I gave it the same name, the variable the same name as my data column, so I can utilize the auto bind functionality rather than checking that checkbox. And I'll hit OK, and now our test case here is data driven. We see that the browser's data source has 2 rows, which, if you're familiar, means that this test case will execute twice. The first time we'll use Edge as our browser name, and the second time we'll use Chrome. So let's go ahead and execute this, make sure we have our WebDriver endpoint selected, and hit the run button. And we'll see that data-driven test occur now on our Selenium machine. There's Edge opening up. Same exact test, so of course Ranorex is cross-browser compatible. You write a test in one browser and you can execute against any other browser. I'll take this time while we're executing here to take a look at the questions. Looks like Chris is doing a good job staying on top of those.
Actually, there was one pretty interesting question here, if this test is using recorded Ranorex scripts or if we're already having Selenium code in the background. So this test is, if I have correctly in mind, a native test using native Ranorex actions. But Jay, you will also show that it is now also possible that we automate directly on the driver, so it's up to the people whatever they prefer.
Correct.
Will they show that?
Yes, definitely.
I think just briefly. Yeah. So believe me, this will definitely be interesting for you, because in this case it will then become possible if you already have an existing test, a Selenium test available. If it's already written in C#, you can just copy and paste it over, or if you would like to use a CSS selector out of whatever reason, then just carry out one Selenium action in a code module or in a user code and then keep on working the Ranorex way. So it will help you. You can work on native Selenium. Okay?
That's a great point.
Looks good. Jay, back to you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's a great point, and we'll definitely be showing that later. We did have an error with our test. Let's take a look at... looks like maybe I don't have the correct driver installed on this machine, so I'll go ahead and cancel the test here. Important to note that you do want to keep the proper drivers installed on whatever execution machine that you have. Should have mentioned that at the beginning. Not only is it necessary to have the Selenium server, but each driver will have its own, each browser will have its own driver. That will also kind of be a prerequisite for you.
I will also mention something when I will talk about the best practices, especially when it comes to environments like Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, or the Selenium box. So I'll answer a couple of things or discuss a couple of things there.
Perfect. Yeah, I guess the main point of that was to show you that nothing's changed with Ranorex. You still work with it the same way. Really, the only thing that changes is how you execute. So let's move on. Chris mentioned in the beginning slides there, one of the main pros of this feature that we've added is the scalability. So the ability to set up so-called Selenium grids or cloud environments and be able to distribute and execute your tests in parallel. Very huge feature, obviously a big time saver as well. So let's go ahead and show you an example of that. I do have, or Ranorex has rather, a Selenium grid stood up. Let's take a quick look at it. RX grid there. So this is the kind of UI for the grid, showing us, what machines we have, what browser versions we have as well. So this kind of gives you a high-level view of our so-called Selenium grid. As you see, we have a couple of Windows 10 machines here, each with different sets of browsers. We also have some Mac and Linux machines as well. So we could target any one of these using the new feature, and I'm going to show you guys how we do that here in Ranorex Studio. So just as before, just as we added a single machine, here we're going to actually add the grid. And let's go ahead and do the same functionality here, the same workflow. We're going to add an endpoint of type WebDriver. Let's call it RX Grid. And that is RX Grid Hub is the address. So I need to put that in. Oop, one too many T's there. RX Grid Hub with the port 4444. And there we go. Let's go ahead and test that connection. Make sure it's working. Looks good. So let's add this endpoint. And now the main point of this, and one of the newer parts of this feature, is the ability to target certain capabilities, as they're called, or certain machines and browser versions is a good way of thinking about it. So to do so, right now if we just run this, it's going to pick at random a machine and a browser. So it's a kind of a round-robin approach, I believe. So if you're executing multiple tests, it's just going to basically pick the first available in a round-robin fashion. But we actually want to modify this a bit and really target something specific here. So we'll go to this little button off to the right and select View Details. This is where you'll see the so-called configurations that can be created. So let's make a couple. We'll give an example here for browsers. Let's call the first configuration, we'll call it the Firefox config. And we can give it a description if we need to. Kind of self-explanatory with the name there though. So what you'll be doing here is you'll actually be using JSON notation JSON objects are obviously my favorite type of objects. I'm a little biased, of course, with the same name. But Ranorex actually helps you out with this. So here we have a link. This is going to take you to our so-called capabilities configurator page. So this is live, and what this allows you to do is basically select, what platform you're going to target. Let's go ahead and stick with Windows for now. But maybe we want to specifically target Windows 10. We look at our grid hub there. We see we have all Windows 10 machines in this case. We're also going to pick, in this case, a Firefox as our browser. I called it the Firefox config. If we need to pick a specific version, we can do so from this drop-down. Now keep in mind that, of course, you want to target a browser version that is actually on your environment. So if you pick the wrong version, of course, it won't work. But if you leave this blank, that's perfectly fine as well. It's just going to use whatever version is currently installed. Just an extra way to specify there. We also have currently, if you're looking at a cloud solution like Sauce Labs as your execution environment, we have that in the provider column here, the provider dropdown. We're going to be adding some more as well. This is very, very early stage of the configurator. Just to keep you, or to give you an idea, this is more of a visual tool to show you how this JSON notation will look. Of course, you could also do it yourself. You could add as many of these capabilities as you want. This is kind of a simplistic version of this. We will be adding providers as we work our partnerships out with different companies. So we will also support cloud-based executions through those providers. Let's take this text here that's been generated for me and copy it to my clipboard. That is going to be that JSON notation that I put here in my capabilities window. So let's paste it. So there we have our config for Firefox. Now I'm going to do the others quite quickly here. Let's go ahead and save this one first. Let's add a new configuration. We'll call it the Edge config. And same as before, I'm going to go to that configurator and just swap out my browser for Edge. Copy this to my clipboard. And back in my JSON window, we'll paste it. Let's save that. And we'll go ahead and add one more. We'll call it the Chrome config. And let's go back to our configurator here and choose Chrome. Copy that JSON. So here we're actually specifying, how our execution will, or what machine type and what browser type our execution will run on. So we have three configurations here. Now we could choose a default one so that if I just execute this test without any command line arguments, as I'm going to show you here, you can specify these endpoints and configurations as a command line argument to your test executable. But if not, we'll simply have this default configuration chosen. That's what's going to run if we, for instance, just run the executable file, your Ranorex test. Let's go ahead and hit back, and I'll show you how useful this is. And the way we're going to do that, I kind of mentioned the test executable there, but for those of you not familiar with Ranorex, let's take a look at the output of every Ranorex test. So if I go to my project, right-click, and open my output folder, you'll see that at the end of the day, what you're generating here is nothing more than an executable file. So that executable file, you can move it wherever you like, double-click it, and it's going to run your Ranorex test. Now because of that, I have created a batch file which will execute this test 3 times in parallel, each time targeting a different configuration. So let's open that batch file and take a quick look at it. So you can see it here. Oh, didn't want to run it. I meant to right-click it and take a peek at it. So as mentioned, that test executable does take some command line arguments. So here we have just some setting some folder structure. This is the real execution line here. We're using the start, which allows us to execute these 3 asynchronously or at the same time. But you see that here's our test executable, and we provide a couple of arguments here, such as what endpoint we're targeting. Again, we're targeting that RX grid. That's by name, so we called it RX grid here. And then we're also picking a specific config. So as you can see, all three of these are pretty much the same, with the only difference being the configuration which is chosen. So when I double click this batch file to execute it, it is going to run all three of these tests in parallel with different configurations, and what we'll see is that my reports will be come back and generated on my desktop. So I think it kind of speaks for itself, the huge feature that is the ability to scale your test and run tests in parallel. Very, very cool. Let's go ahead and I'll close this batch file for now. And we're just going to execute it here. So of course I'll just double click it, but I think you could see how this also can fit into your test management or CI environments as well. At the end of the day, you're basically just using executable files. Let's go ahead and double click it, and we'll see that Ranorex is starting. Oh, I didn't see that message. Let's take a quick look at it again. Boy, let me make sure that I name this correctly. RX grid, yes, that's correct. The config names are correct as well. 1 second, folks. Of course, it works right before the webinar, and then you go live, and these types of things happen. Failed to set. Did you catch that, Chris? What that message might be?
I had an eye on the Q&A panel. So actually, failed to set endpoint as element root.
You know
No
what? I
endpoint
know what it
named
was.
RX grid. You have the X.
Yep, I know what it was. I didn't build my project after adding
Oh,
that endpoint. So
yeah.
make sure you save. It's the lesson of the day here. So I added my endpoint, but I didn't save my project, so it's using that outdated executable file that didn't have RX grid.
Jay, happens to the best.
That's right. Always when you go live. So let's try that again. I've rebuilt my project, which would generate that new executable. So we should see now everything runs.
I would say the next time we do it with the camera, then we can see you starting sweating. What about that? Does it work? And etched config as it. Have a look at the configs in the project. It's just validated.
You know what? I don't think I saved them either. Oh no. Oh boy.
Jay, let's move on. Let's have a look then afterwards at my solution, because I would like to show you, just as a little bit of an appetizer, some things of Docker, and when we have a look at TeamCity, a little bit talking about scaling, and I have endpoints configured. Jay, let's move on.
Move on for this.
This is just copy and pasting JSON in it.
That's right.
Although maybe you like the name.
I do, yes. So I made the fumble and didn't save my endpoint configurations here. So apologies for that, guys. Always remember to save. All right, so moving on, let's talk about, as Christian mentioned, it is possible now to write your actual Selenium code in Ranorex. So before we had, basically we're executing Ranorex code through the Selenium WebDriver, but if you want to, you can certainly also use Selenium code. So let's take a look at this second test case here, this Access WebDriver API. And basically kind of the same exact thing as we're doing up here. We're logging into WordPress. However, I have a module here for logging in. We're going to, instead of the record and playback functionality we used before, we're going to write Selenium code to press the login button. So let's go ahead and open up that code module, and I'll show you that, of course, we're using just regular old Selenium code here. Let's set up a WebDriver. I gotta go through the host for that. And it's try get as WebDriver endpoint is the method. I'm going to paste the rest of the code in here, a little conditional check, just to make sure our WebDriver endpoint is not null. And then what we can do is actually target this. for what we are going to do, let's call it existing driver. Existing driver. First we need to, of course, instantiate that. And I'm going to do so through the WebDriver endpoint. There it is. WebDrivers. So this is all simply WebDriver code. Of course, make sure you use the correct using statement. You have to do that, of course. And the code is, code completion sometimes will get you. Let's call it, we have to find our browser in this case. So we're going to use the starts with to find it. Let's say it starts with the Ranorex. So this shows you how cumbersome this actually is working in Selenium code. And then once we have our browser found, let's find an element on it. We'll use the by ID in this case. If we take a look at that login button in our Ranorex repository, we'll see that we were able to find that login button through the unique ID WP submit. So I'm going to go ahead and use that same ID. So back to the code here. Let's find it by ID, and we're going to use that WP submit is the ID we're using. And all we're going to do is click it. So now, as mentioned, we kind of have some Selenium code mixed in with our regular old Ranorex modules here. So we're going to open the browser with Ranorex, log in, but hit that login button now using the Selenium code. So as Chris mentioned, if you have some Selenium code out there in C# already and you want to bring everything under one roof, you can simply copy paste that code in here. Well, let's go ahead now and let's execute this. Let's choose let's just choose RX Grid as our endpoint. Or actually, we'll do the Windows 10 so we could see it run actually. You know what, I just noticed my browser variable still there, so let's change that. And let's go ahead and, yeah, that should be good. And I got a little build message there. Maybe I had some syntactical errors. Yes. Little W for big W. Again, working in code, you see the issues you can run into. Much better to use the Ranorex approach, in my opinion. The action modules.
Actually, and also when we saw this copy and paste stuff, especially when you're copying selectors from the dev tools from the browser into your code, that can take time. Hey Jay, maybe we need to speed up a little bit.
Yep, this will be one last point is the refactoring. So this is a quick test. Should be over in a few seconds here. All right, so that closed. So there you go, just an example how you can use Selenium code as well. But let's talk about the Ranorex method and why it's so good. Again, this object mapping is one of the hardest parts of Selenium. As Chris mentioned in the beginning, we've heard from many consultants that hardly anyone gets this right the first time. Well, with the Ranorex solution, you already have such an object mapping framework. I'll show you why that's so useful. Let's say you're a tester and you don't want to use record and playback. You can also utilize the action table here. And here we have some objects we collected from our UI. For instance, the login, the password fields. We can actually drag and drop these up and create actions in that way. So here I want to do a mouse click on the user login. Let's then maybe type into it. So I'll drag it up again and select key sequence, my username, whatever it may be. So you can work in this way as well. There's no need to use record and playback, but you have this nice, human readable action table to work with to build up your scripts. Now behind all this, of course, is nothing more than .NET code. So if we right click any action and view code, you'll see that Ranorex is kind of abstracting this view away from us to make it nice and human readable so that you don't need to be a developer to understand what's going on in your test. Now, I mentioned the beauty of this object mapping that comes with the Ranorex solution, the Ranorex framework, is that you have a central point of maintenance. So let's take a look. Not only can you use the action table, but we also have the ability to work in code if you are more of the developer-oriented type. And we have the same kind of a drag and drop functionality there as well. So if we take our repository, and let's just open it outside here, let's put it on the right side. Same exact functionality here. I can work in code and do pretty much the same thing. Let's say we're going to work with the user login field, and we're also going to work with the password field. I can drag those into my code here in order to set up references to them. Let me get a little space here. There we go. And so now I can work with these to say the same exact thing. Let's say user login dot click. And let's type into it using the press keys method. So a good way even to look at the action table is it can kind of instruct you on how to work with the Ranorex API. Again, if we look at that recording module and view code, you'll see the same exact methods being used here. There's the click method, there's the press keys method. So it can actually be almost a tutorial type of tool for you. But the most important part is, again, I mentioned this is the central point of maintenance for your objects, the Ranorex repository. And by that, what I mean is that any change you make here is automatically going to refactor in your action table as well as in your code. So to give you a quick example of that, let's create just a simple folder here. Maybe I want to group all these objects because they're all on the login page. So I take the 3 objects here and move them into this login page simple folder. Now you'll notice when I do so, keep an eye on the code here, because you'll see that once I make that change, my code is automatically refactored for the change. Now this is not only, in this example, we just moved it to a simple folder, but that's the same if I change the path information, if I change even the name of the object. Let's just change this to login. You'll see again, as soon as I hit enter, automatic refactoring. So this is a huge benefit. You know, you get this out of the box with the Ranorex framework. No need to build your own page object model as you would in Selenium. All right, that is the last feature I wanted to show. I know we're running a little short on time here. I do apologize again for the grid execution, probably the coolest feature, and unfortunately missed that save button. But let's turn it over to you, Chris, for the more advanced stuff that you want to show. I will make you here.
Okay, now I have something like -4 minutes. Yeah,
that
time travel would be nice. Jay, could you give me the presenter?
Passing it to you now. Here we go. And I'll
okay,
show
my screen. Yeah, now you are in charge of the questions. Okay. Now I could save time, say fasten your seatbelt. That will become fast, but I won't do that because I don't know if you will even understand anything. Okay, the whole webinar is recorded, so if some of you have to leave a little bit earlier, you can watch the remaining parts also offline and listen to my beautiful voice. But for now, let's have a look at my demo script here with the stuff I would like to show you. I would like to move a little bit more in the DevOps space. So when we saw the tests that Jay was doing, and especially when you run that stuff in parallel, you heavily scale that stuff. You could have interactions if you run everything on one system. And there I would like to introduce Docker, talk a little bit about that. But before this, I will run the tests in a CI environment. I personally took TeamCity, like the tool pretty much. Then I will spawn a Docker container that contains a fresh WordPress installation, and I will run a test on such a Docker container which automates the bootstrapping process. So setting up the WordPress installation, when everything was fine, I will destroy the container. Let's have a look at my Ranorex test suite here. That should be pretty straightforward. I will spawn my WordPress container. I will quickly open such a Docker port 5555, without the comma. And for those of you who don't know what Docker is, I can really recommend you have a look at it, have a look at Wikipedia or something like that. Briefly summarized, you can imagine Docker to be something like a very small version of a virtual machine, of a VM. So you can isolate individual processes and start them in a fresh environment. So that's very helpful for DevOps. I just start a new WordPress instance with Apache behind it, and I can run my test on it. When I'm done, I kill it. And that way you can spawn the environments exactly in the way you need the environment or you need in the state where the environment has to be for the test sequence, for the upcoming test sequence. So for this WordPress stuff, this is, I will select the language, then I will fill out that stuff, or actually Ranorex will do it. And it will do it in a natively or in a fresh Docker container. I will open here this, here you see the containers. There are just 4 of them. One is Elasticsearch, the TeamCity server, MySQL, and this is a WordPress. This is the one which I opened right now. And when I start my Ranorex test, now this time on my local host, so with our good old plugin, I will run it in Chrome. And here we saw it, a new Docker endpoint with port 3139 was opened. And now Ranorex, let's call it classic. Oh, provide a username. Okay, I interrupted the test with a mouse click. Sorry, that was my fault. But this is just where I wanted to show you that Docker container is spawned, and I stopped the test case and it automatically got deleted. But the big advantage of that is you have full control of your environment. You can run your environments the way you need them, and that makes especially sense if you run all that stuff in parallel. I will now do a little bit of magic. I will go to my TeamCity instance. Let's have a look at where is the configuration. My build steps. I will build my solution, or I will install the NuGet packages, build my solution, and then trigger the execution to start lots of tests in parallel. What I did here, I didn't use a batch file. I wrote this pretty simple C# program, which I'm also planning to somewhere put on GitHub. You can have a look at it. Actually, that's not rocket science at all. It just takes the exe, in this case for my project WordPress Docker demo. This is the exe to start, Ranorex arguments, and I created just a parser in this program that parses my configurations for Windows 10 Firefox, Windows 10 Chrome, Windows Mac on Safari, Linux, and so on. So a couple of these environments which I have available in my Selenium grid. Here, this is my Linux environment, Mac, and then it will start one test after the other in a sequence, and then we will really then do an automation how we should do it, that we get a result quickly. And did I forget anything? No, that will be triggered here by TeamCity, and then we report back the results. So let me click the run button. We will see on the agent. The agent is now this time running on my computer. And now when we have a look at the build log, here they are. 5 environments are started. Let's have a look at the, this is Mac. Here it is. And there should also somewhere be, this is my Linux system. And now, for example, we see the automation on my Linux VM and on the left-hand side on the Mac. Mac, what we figured out, Mac became the new Internet Explorer, like in the times back, IE8. So the Safari driver is still under heavy development. It's not that far as the others are. So for Safari, there we're still all the time waiting for new Safari drivers to get released. That issues got fixed. But now you see I executed 5 tests, I think. There were 5 endpoints which I had here, which I executed, and they were all of them executed in parallel. So when we would run that stuff sequentially, then now we would have a speed up of 5 times. And this is what I wanted to show you. What Jay mentioned, the individual endpoint configurations, I had these configurations available here in my RX GridHub endpoint, and here my Mac Safari, my Linux Chrome, my Windows 10 Firefox, Win 10 Chrome, Linux Firefox, and I'm just iterating, or I'm just starting a test. And that will really make your automation faster. This Selenium runner is currently just a workaround. We will in the future also provide a more convenient possibility for you guys to scale your tests here. And something pretty nice, what I also want to show you, you all know that our report is pretty much an HTML file. When I'm now going to my build artifacts, and let's have a look at Mac Safari. Out of some reason, we have now the report directly here stored as an artifact in TeamCity. Out of some reason, this weblog title was not found. We could now just run the test dedicated on this Safari. Let me say in this, where is it, Open WordPress. We could immediately see what is not working here. So this is something that really can make your tests, or could make your tests faster, or that you get the results faster. Let's have a look at the successful result here on Linux. Everything looked good. We have the screenshot still in there. Yep, looks wonderful. Or do we need more? Okay, now you have seen what is possible here. We actually also discussed putting the script, the batch script that Jay presented, and also this spawn WordPress container here online. This is nothing official, but I just wanted to show you what you can do with our tool, what you can achieve. In here, I wrote some custom code using docker.net, and I was automating the REST API of Docker to spawn my environments. And now I would like to quickly have a look at some best practices here, what you would have to follow, what you should follow to achieve such kind of testing, that you can run all these tests in parallel. So let's have a look at some tips and tricks. First of all, really this is important, guys. Make your tests independent. A test should not rely on the test before it. If the first test fails, you will never be able to execute your second test. And also it will make it pretty hard for you to run the tests in parallel if they are somehow relying on each other, on the state of another test. And also you need really full control of your test environment. If something pretty much screws up your environment, then your test does not fail because the application does not work, but because your environment was wrong. So therefore provisioning with something like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, all that stuff would help you. We are aware of that, and maybe we will also provide webinars in future to tackle that stuff more specifically. But I already wanted to mention it here. Keep it in mind. And also, which tests to run. First of all, don't run everything. That would just take time. Don't run every test in every browser, with every browser version on every operating system, and maybe there is even another combination, screen resolutions. That doesn't make sense. Identify your most critical user paths. What is essential for your business to work? If you have a shop, then the people need to have to be able to find the items in your shop, and they have to be able to put that stuff in the cart and then buy it. Something like that. Run these tests frequently, especially in the most common browsers, common browser operating system, browser version combinations. That stuff works. And the rest, the other tests, do them as well, but not on all the browsers. Just check that they are working. You can run them also in the nightly regression tests, but these most critical paths you can even run when a developer commits something to your build system. And then you can also vary the combinations over the runs, maybe with some, okay, once this, another time that, putting in some randomness by selecting the environment. And if you figure out one environment always fails, put it in your regression cycle. And then when we talk about the execution environment, Jay mentioned that, yeah, Selenium can become tricky, especially WebDriver versions, server versions, client versions, all that stuff. So when the question is, when should we use cloud, an in-house grid, or something like the Selenium box? Unfortunately, there's not really a golden rule, but this is an idea what finally came out after talking to some Selenium consultants. Use an in-house grid, something like this Rx Grid Hub, which I had here, for the most common browsers and the most common operating system combinations. So Windows 10, Windows 7 would be good idea, maybe 64 and 32 bits for Windows 7, and Windows 8.1, I don't know how frequent that is, and definitely a Mac. And use that stuff that is very frequent build up an in-house grid here. This, if you have the possibility for virtual machines, if you have the environment, the hardware. The exotic and a little bit more expensive tests you could do in the cloud. Go to Source Labs, to Browser Stack, to these guys. They have the more exotic stuff available in their cloud. And if you really need a big Selenium grid, a big environment, then consider using something like the Selenium box, where you get a managed environment of your Selenium grid. To make some advertisement for the Selenium box, we will do a webinar for the Selenium box together with Ranorex mid of July. We will have one of the founders of Selenium Grid in there, so believe me, that will definitely become interesting, and we will talk a little bit more about grid, what we can do here. So it would be a pleasure for me to see a couple of you guys also in this webinar. But for now, let me move on to my last best practices slide here. I would like to quickly talk about speeding up your tests, how you can do that. First of all, running stuff in parallel will make your whole testing faster, because if you have 10 iterations and you can run all that stuff in parallel, hey, great, 10 times faster. And this could work with a data-driven test. If you don't need to iterate the data on one system one by one, but could distribute it, do it. Segment your data-driven tests and run them in a distributed manner. Then when we're talking here about web testing. The ID is the fastest selector. If you have an ID available, use it. If you're developers, if you're in touch with the development environment, talk to the guys. Hey, can you give me an ID for this object? I need it in every test. If they do it, your tests will be faster. And also you could use more specific Ranorex paths. That is an option. And also a combination of the wait for page or wait for document loaded action, which we are providing in combination with the turbo mode, can also be beneficial, can help you. Only enabling turbo mode, be cautious, and also try that, especially if you have a dynamic content where the website loads content afterwards. Sometimes Ranorex is faster than the website. We recognize an element, click on it, and yeah, okay, we found it, we clicked it, but the code was not there. So this is something what you can try. And at the end, you can also disable the debugging capability, and switch to release when in your Ranorex project settings. That will also give you some speed up, not 100 or 200%, but for a big test suite that, let me say, runs for an hour, it could give you 5 to 10 minutes, roughly. Could happen. Try it. That's pretty much non-cost optimization, so you don't lose anything. The tests won't become unstable after that. Okay, Jay? Anything from your side?
Yeah, I've been keeping up with all the questions in the questions panel. We will certainly take some time here, though, to wait and see if
I just saw you had a little bit more work to do than I had.
slightly, but all good questions and some good positive feedback as well. So yeah, if anyone would like to field a question, we'll stand by for a couple more minutes here. Sorry again that we went a little over time.
Oh, like good feedback. If you have bad feedback, I can send you Jay's email. Okay. So Jay, I answered most of the questions at the beginning. Do you have a question in mind already, which you would like to answer here?
Yes, one gentleman did actually ask a pretty good question. He asked, would you need a license per endpoint? And if you don't have enough licenses, what happens? Do the tests simply fail, or do they not run at all? The answer is they won't run at all without a license. However, there is part of our API that you could utilize to wait for a valid
Give me a
license.
moment. Yep. Jay, just continue, because I have exactly such an example here where I had the wrong licenses set. No, this is exit code -1. Just give me a moment.
Sure.
That was on the maybe which one? That one, exit code 42. Here I was using, you see it here, I started these 3 tests, and I had wrong, I don't know, maybe a wrong license server in use, and then you'll get an exit code 42 that tells you, hey, couldn't get a license. And also, when you just have on one node a node locked license installed, then you can only run 1 test. But for every execution here, I was running 5 executions on my system. 5 runtime licenses got used for that.
Exactly.
Okay, so the licensing is a pretty important topic here, and actually with 7.1, this was what we were using here, was a beta version of 7.1. 7.1 will get released, I would say, pretty soon. I don't know if we are now talking about days or a week. I don't know the current state of our tests, but things look pretty promising, and we also have planned to extend or to provide a little bit more convenient licensing models, or some more convenient licensing for the runtime. So stay tuned, guys.
Here's another good question. Could we be able to show different test cases running on different VMs within the grid? So kind of similar to what we're looking at here with the command line arguments. Of course, we're defining an endpoint configuration here. You could also further define using the test case or TC argument which specific test case you want to run. So if you want to split up your execution by test case on different machines, you can certainly do that as well. I don't think we have do we have a sample of that perhaps? Or?
No, we don't have, but that wouldn't be a problem at all. I will, like I said, I will upload the code of my, where is it, of this Selenium runner here, which I mentioned. Actually, this is just a for loop around these configurations, but you could do the same for exactly do exactly the same for test cases. Like I said, the Selenium runner is just a workaround. I will somewhere publish it on GitHub. If you need extensions on that, you'd have to do it on your own, but this is definitely not complicated. It's just a for loop with an string equals configurations. So give it a try. One question I saw at the end, will you share the recording? I think if you mean share the recording of this session, yeah, definitely you will get an email with the recording of this session the next days. One question, the licenses which I was talking about, we will provide a more flexible licensing model for runtime licenses, especially for the execution of such Selenium tests. And one thing, what maybe I don't know if we mentioned that, you can also run all the tests which we showed here. You can run these tests also in on Sauce Labs, on Browser Stack, on Perfecto. that doesn't matter. It's a Selenium test. We're automating Selenium. Okay. Having a look at the Q&A, there was one thing regarding a question regarding copy and pasting the code, or you using existing Selenium code. So if you have .NET, the C# Selenium code, you could simply copy and paste it in Ranorex, build it, run it, done. If you have existing Java code available, you would have the option of triggering the Java Selenium test and then importing back the results. There we have a block for that. And another option would be that actually Selenium, Java and .NET for the Selenium here, that code is nearly one-to-one the same, only camel case is slightly, only one letter is different. You could even copy and paste the Java code into .NET and make it or rewrite it for .NET. That should also work. Okay, Jay, did we?
Good. One question gentleman asked is native Ranorex API with targeting Edge, but currently we can work with Edge through WebDriver, but I guess they want to know if we're bringing that functionality
to the native one. Ooh, I talked to our dev guys, and Microsoft, I don't know if they are offering an API, so we're automating the Internet Explorer through the Internet Explorer DLL, Internet Explorer assembly, and getting the data. And for Edge, they pretty much closed all the holes that we used to work with that. So Edge, I fear that won't be possible. That it doesn't look that good. So it might, for the moment, we will only be able to support Edge through Selenium.
Yeah, I think you still can make use of that as well, because again, it's nothing changed really with the Ranorex side of things. It's more just on the execution side.
Yeah, actually, you're right. Okay, that was the question you already answered. If we can demo running different test cases in the grid, yep, we could update the batch file which you showed, Jay, but this is pretty straightforward. Then there is another question.
Yeah, actually, I can do that while you're fielding a few questions here. Maybe we can save that.
I'm going to be able to okay, that was the question regarding to run the tests on Edge through the .NET API. I'm just catching up with the test cases. Coding, there's one. I was told you were going to allow coding through Visual Studio to the Selenium endpoints. That should, oh wow, wonderful screensaver here on Linux. Visual Studio, where is my project? Give me a moment. Let me open, where is it? The folder in Explorer. Actually, that stuff here we have Selenium, not a Selenium, SLN, a Visual Studio solution here. And if I have it correctly in mind, but I don't know the code by heart, it should also be possible now to create endpoints via the API, but I would have to check our user stories. If it is possible, have a look at our documentation once we released Ranorex 7.1. This is something, sorry, I don't know by heart. But in here with the code that Jay showed, with this get WebDriver from endpoint, that stuff he showed before presenting the maintenance part, there you could implement here all this code that you can implement in Visual Studio. So you can use Ranorex, let me say, to get the objects and then keep on working in Visual Studio. As you see here, that's a standard Visual Studio project, and this is the code for spawning the WordPress, the Docker containers, actually for stopping here. I don't have custom code in there, no, just the code created by Ranorex. But as you see, we can open everything in Visual Studio, so that's not a problem at all. Okay, through Ranorex API in Visual Studio to endpoints. But that should also, okay, to rephrase the question, going to allow coding through Visual Studio to through the Ranorex API in Visual Studio to work on these endpoints. That should work in 7.1. But like I said, have a look at the documentation once Ranorex 7.1 becomes online. Should be available in the next days here for this API. Yeah, Jay, I think we're good with the questions. Hopefully we asked all these questions. There are so many questions in there where, yeah, it would take quite a long time. We didn't answer project-specific questions like, okay, in my project I have this problem. If you have such a question, then please get in touch with us directly. This would be wonderful. Then we can help you directly with your individual issue. And because these things would not be beneficial and maybe interesting for the rest of the audience. Okay, Jay.
Yep.
We're already a little bit over time. It's getting dark here in Austria. I'm here by bike and I don't know if my lights are working.
Well, we'll let you go.
Okay.
There's a couple, one question too, I could reach out via email. That was for the wait for a valid license code. That better taken care of over email. But yeah, thank everyone for attending. I hope you found some good value in this presentation. And certainly any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Chris directly. We're always here to help.
And I would like to answer one last comment. I'm not scared of dark, but I'm scared of the police who could give me a fine when I'm driving with my bike without the light. Okay, guys. It was me a pleasure, and maybe see you at the next webinar. Keep in mind, Selenium Box might be interesting for you, but for now, have a nice day. Bye-bye here from Austria. Bye-bye from Europe.
Take care, everyone. Bye.